So, we're talking about Jewish law, a legal system that's literally thousands of years old, grappling with some of the most complex questions of our time. But this isn't just a story about one faith. It's a really fascinating look at how any system of tradition and law survives the test of time. It's about that constant conversation between our past and our present.
So how does that even work? I mean, really, how does a legal and ethical framework that's rooted in ancient texts stay relevant in a world of space travel, genetic engineering, and constantly evolving social norms? That's the huge question we're going to try and unpack here.
Okay, so the entire system is really built around this one central word, halakhah. You can think of it as the legal backbone of Judaism. But it's not just some static rule book. It's a dynamic process, a way of thinking that has been developed and debated by rabbis for centuries.
To really get how this all works in practice, there's nothing better than a case study. And honestly, there's hardly a more powerful example than the debate over same-sex unions. This is where an ancient text comes into direct contact with modern life.
So this is the starting point, right here. A verse from the book of Leviticus that, when you read it, seems completely unambiguous. For centuries, this one text formed the basis of a clear and unanimous prohibition.
But then, you fast forward to the 20th and 21st centuries, and suddenly, this verse creates a massive challenge. As our scientific and social understanding of sexuality evolved, many Jews, especially within the conservative movement, felt this deep, deep conflict between their commitment to halakhah and their modern ethical values. And look, the debate was so intense because both sides had really powerful arguments. On one hand, you've got the literal text of the Bible and this long, unbroken chain of rabbinic precedent. But on the other hand, you have new scientific knowledge and a deeply held Jewish value of human dignity. So what do you do when tradition and ethics seem to be pulling in completely opposite directions?
So after years, and I mean years, of intense study and debate, the conservative movement's main law committee finally came to a decision. And what they decided was, well, to put it mildly, it was unconventional.
They approved two. Yeah, two completely contradictory yet equally valid official positions on the exact same issue, at the exact same time. One upheld the traditional prohibition, and the other created a new path for inclusion.
And what's really interesting here are the practical differences. You got position A, which says no to LGBTQ+ clergy and commitment ceremonies because it sees that biblical prohibition as applying broadly. Then you have position B, which says yes to both, arguing that the verse in Leviticus only applies to specific sexual acts, not to committed loving relationships. The movement basically said that individual rabbis and their congregations could choose which ruling to follow. So how on earth is that possible, right? How can one legal system produce two opposite answers? Well, the key, the whole secret, is in understanding the toolkit rabbis use to interpret their foundational texts.
All right, so this is where we really get into the nuts and bolts of halakhah. It's not just about reading the rules. It's about how you read them, what you prioritize, and how you balance all these different kinds of texts against each other. At the very heart of this toolkit, you've got these two big ideas, halakhah and agadah. Halakhah is the legal stuff, the laws, the codes, all the precedents. It's the structure. Agadah, on the other hand, is, well, it's everything else, the stories, the philosophy, the ethics. It provides the moral context and all the flexibility. And there's this fantastic analogy from a famous poet who compared them to, get this, ice and water. One is rigid and structured, giving you a solid foundation. The other is fluid, flowing, adapting to the shape of whatever contains it. But here is the absolute key. They are both forms of the same substance, two essential parts of a single whole. You need both of them, and that creative tension between the two is the very engine of Jewish legal evolution. Now, of course, different Jewish movements strike this balance in totally different ways. For Orthodox Judaism, halakhah is largely seen as a direct, unchanging, and binding command from God. Then there's conservative Judaism, which also considers halakhah to be binding, but sees it as a system that can and actually must evolve with new moral and scientific knowledge. And finally, for Reform Judaism, halakhah is a deeply respected guide, but at the end of the day, the ultimate authority rests with an individual's informed conscience. Okay, so let's take this whole toolkit and apply it somewhere completely different, but just as high stakes, medical ethics. I mean, here, the questions are things the ancient rabbis could never have possibly imagined, and the answers are literally a matter of life and death. And the central question here is about as profound as it gets. At what exact moment is a person considered legally dead?
And this isn't some abstract debate. The answer determines everything, from when a doctor can turn off a ventilator, to when a family can begin to mourn, to whether life-saving organ donation is even possible. What's just amazing here is that something that feels like a fixed biological fact has actually evolved within Jewish law. I mean, way back in the Talmud, the primary test was simple. You hold a feather to the nose. If it didn't move, life had ceased. Centuries later, with medical advances, the standard shifted to the heart stopping. And now, in our time, there's a fierce debate raging over this new technology-driven concept, brain death. And what's so wild is that the structure of this argument, it's a perfect echo of what we saw with same-sex unions. On the one hand, the traditionalist view is rooted in direct precedent. They argue that for millennia, the definition was clear and physical. Death is when the heart and lungs irreversibly stop, and technology that keeps them going artificially doesn't change that. But the modernist view digs deeper. They ask, what was the principle behind that original precedent? They argue it was always about the irreversible loss of the body's ability to function as an integrated whole. The heart and lungs were just the best signs we had. Today, they say, we have a more precise measure, total brain death, and to stay true to the law's underlying principle, we have to adopt this more accurate scientific standard. So you see, right? This isn't just a one-off thing. Whether we're talking about same-sex unions or brain death, the core conflict is exactly the same. Do you stick to the literal letter of the law, or do you seek to apply its underlying principles to new realities? So what's the big takeaway from all of this? How should we really think about this ancient legal system in our modern world? Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that Jewish law isn't a static book of ancient answers just collecting dust on a shelf. It was never meant to be. It's so much better to think of it as a living, breathing tradition. In fact, one source puts it perfectly, saying it's an ongoing discussion, an attempt to find out what God expects from the Jewish people. That's what it is at its heart, a conversation that spans generations, a dialogue between the past and the really urgent questions of the present. And that's why this matters so much far beyond just Judaism, because this whole dynamic process leaves all of us with a final, really provocative question. When any ancient faith or foundational legal system, built on precedent and revelation, collides with our evolving modern values, who gets the final word? Tradition, science, or maybe, just maybe, the answer is found not in a final verdict, but in the courage to just keep the conversation going.